So this concept of purity of blood will eventually affect race relations in New Spain. Let's take a look at a few racial categories that existed in New Spain early on. We're talking about in the early 16th century, where you primarily have Spaniards who are going to be born in the Americas, who are going to dominate the racial hierarchy and social hierarchy. Okay, so Spaniards who were born in the Americas are known as Creoles. Okay, they're full-blooded Spanish. Okay, so a Creole is not mixed with other races. At least that's the idea, although in reality sometimes, things change. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But basically a Creole is supposed to be full-blooded Spanish, born in the Americas. There were not a lot of Spanish women in the Americas, but there were a few, and they were the ones who gave birth to the Creoles, who dominated things in New Spain early on. They occupied the highest positions, had the best jobs, were involved in government, etc. Now, not all Creoles, occupied a high position. Some were poor individuals as well. But pretty much at this time, the Creoles are running things in New Spain. Okay, full-blooded Spaniards born in the Americas. Another racial category that you have in New Spain is mestizos. Mestizos are 50% indigenous, right, or Native American, and 50% Spanish. Okay, now these are precise percentages, right? So one parent, usually the father, is Spanish and the mother is Native American. All right, and so that will create an offspring which is known as a mestizo from the Spaniards at this time. That they created that category, that racial category. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about mestizos in a little bit. They are going to be a large population in New Spain. The mestizo population grows pretty quick, especially early on because of the conquistadors there who are going to have offspring with Native American women. All right. Another racial category that you have there in New Spain is known as mulatto. Mulatto is Spanish term that's referring to someone who is 50% African and 50% Spanish. Okay, and so we'll talk about Africans in New Spain a little bit later, but this is another racial category. Sometimes the mulattoes would be seen as occupying a lower position in the social hierarchy, lower than mestizos and creoles, because they are connected to Muslim blood. Okay, going back again to Moorish Spain, the Moors were people who were people of color. They were dark skinned, and so as you have Africans in New Spain with dark skin, they will be connected or thought of by the Spanish as being related to the Moors. And the Moors their blood is considered tainted because of their religion, Islam. Okay, so going back to this concept of purity of blood, it is this idea that your blood could be tainted if you're Jewish or Muslim, and then you see race being connected to that as well. All right, so these are three of the main racial categories that you'll find in New Spain, but there were a number of other racial categories that were created by the Spaniards. So remember I was saying 50% this, 50% that. Well, there's other percentages, right? Because you may have a mestizo who would have offspring with a Creole, or a mestizo who would have offspring with a mulatto, right? So there would be different percentages of the three main groups, Spanish, African, and Indigenous, right? So these different percentages would create a new racial category, and the Spaniards had quite a few different racial categories depending on your percentage of blood. Okay, we're not going to go ahead and get into all of those, but there's a number of them, and some of them have quite demeaning names. That are referring to these individuals who have different percentages or mixtures of blood depending on your background there, your ethnic background. And so there was a lot of racial mixing, like I said, going on, especially because there were not a lot of Spanish women in the Americas early on. And this process of racial mixing is known as mestizaje. Mestizaje, okay, so that's a racial mixing, and so there was a lot of racial mixing going on between the various races, and so you'll have a large casta or mixed race population in New Spain.